As I sit here right now, I'm only a few days out from my first marathon in almost 20 years. Which is interesting because I'm not actually a fan of marathons. I mean, my dislike of the marathon distance is what ultimately prompted me to take on ultra marathons. I don't mind passing the marathon distance on my way to the finish line in an ultra, but I don't have any particular affinity for marathons in general. So why am I doing this race if that's the case? It all started with the idea of trying to get my Boston qualifying time to qualify for the Boston Marathon. The Boston Marathon is a dream race for a lot of runners, and with good reason. It's awesome. If you're a runner and a reader, there are so many books on the Boston Marathon that you can almost pick any at random and you will come away from those books both inspired and with an aspirational goal of getting to the Boston Marathon. That's kind of what happened to me, even though I'm not all that fond of the marathon distance. But you can be a fan of a race and not necessarily the distance. It really doesn't have to make sense. It just is what it is. So, yeah, I am going to do a marathon on Sunday. The hope was to get a Boston qualifying time at this marathon. And there's two things going for this particular marathon. One, it's a hometown race. It's the Edmonton Marathon. So I'm happy to be competing in my hometown in a race put on by my hometown. The second thing is that it's a pretty fast course. So as Boston qualifier marathons go, this is the one that I might have had the best chance of actually succeeding on. But that's probably not going to happen now. And there are a couple of good reasons why. See, my running training took a bit of a hit when I did the mountain bike race. And I haven't really gotten back on track as far as the running training is concerned. Part of the reason for that is that as soon as I returned home from the mountain bike race, it was the start of the tapering for the marathon. So essentially what happened is I went from running an ultra at the end of May, recovering from that, doing a bit of running, racing in a mountain bike stage race that I wasn't trained or prepared for at all, coming home, attempting to recover from that and start run training again, and then realizing that I was actually at the beginning of my tapering phase for the Edmonton Marathon, and realizing that I wasn't going to build any additional running fitness at that point. I mean, in looking at it that way, you're asking probably, what tapering? You didn't train for this marathon. And you're right. I guess I'm basically just tapering from the mountain bike race. I mean, it was almost 200 kilometers after all with like no training. I think I might need a coach. It's sort of a no-win situation when it comes to performance goals, but I do have them. Not the least of which is to just simply finish a marathon. I might not be super excited about competing in this particular marathon, but I'm going to make it exciting for myself by setting a few goals for this race. That will help. Not only will it help with the wellness element as far as motivation and discipline are concerned when I get to the race, but it'll also give me some metrics by which I can measure my success on the day of the race, and that will mean something. If not at the race, then certainly after the race. My first goal is to set a half marathon PB at this marathon. And that might seem confusing, but last year I actually had a relatively quick half marathon, and it was a couple of minutes off of a PB. So I knew I was going to come back to this race this year because I was going to go after a half marathon PB. Then it was suggested to me that I should go look at the Boston qualifying times. Then I read a couple of books about Boston, and I decided to sign up for the marathon in hopes of getting my BQ. That is probably not on the table at this point, but the half marathon PB is. The first half of my marathon on Sunday, I am going to attempt a half marathon PB. The downside to that is that it's fraught with all manner of danger. If I set a pace that puts me on track for a half marathon PB in the first half of the marathon, there is a very good chance that my legs are just going to explode on the second half of the marathon. And for those of you keeping score at home, that would be the second half marathon I would have to run that day. Which brings me to my second goal. I am going to attempt to run a PB half marathon for the first half of the marathon. And then when that's done, I'm going to attempt to run a second PB half marathon for the second half of the marathon. If I accomplish both of those tasks, guess what I get? A Boston qualifier. Are you keeping up with my reasoning here? The completely reasonable follow-up question to all that is, how likely is it? It's not likely. 2 PB half marathons back to back on the same day in an attempt to get a marathon PB that would also be a BQ? I mean, dare to dream, right? Besides, I kind of like no-win situations. Shocking. An airplane has gone overhead while I'm trying to record this.